I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I also want to thank my co-authors, Naomi Pier and Isadora Bordini, who helped out. But I do want to really call out the stakeholders that participate in this way. We appreciate your flexibility in being available for this type of a meeting and helping us still deliver our programs under these extraordinary conditions. So I really appreciate that. I also want you to know that we're trying our best to make our information available to you in a way that is easily consumed, and this being a virtual field day is a little different for us, and our goal, and Iman has always impressed upon us that we should be sharing with you the visuals of what we do, and that's easy to do live when we're driving through the field. And if you've been on these tours before, you know I normally tour you through plots and we talk about what's out there. Can't do that precisely today, but we're going to go ahead and try our best to emulate that with some videos. One of the video options is not available, so the video will be a little bit degraded, but hopefully you'll still be able to catch the spirit of it. And I also want you to recognize that this is new technology to us as well. We're learning as you are on how to do these things. I'm not Steven Spielberg or George Lucas, so we have what we have, and I hope you appreciate the effort anyways. So today I am going to talk about cotton insect management, and that means the two key cotton insect pests of whiteflies and ligas. And specifically, we're going to focus on effective and selective chemistry, because those would normally be the plots that we would be touring right now, driving through. So no further ado, I'm going to jump right into some results before we look at some of these videos and explain to you that this is from the Ligas insecticide screening trial. And what you see is a group of entries there at the top of your screen: carbene, transform, acynthrin, which is a mix of acephate and bifenthrin, and then some experimentals. You also have the untreated check down here at the bottom. These are the seasonal means. So this is the average number of nymphs that we found in these plots per 100 sweeps. And you can see those are some pretty good numbers. And some of the products worked well and some perhaps not as well. We sprayed twice in this trial on threshold. Now, arguably the second spray may not have been economic because it was very close to cut out. And that's really too late for most Ligas sprays to have an impact on production. Then we have a group of other entries that didn't perform quite as well, so they had to be sprayed more, 3 or 4 times in this case. And that includes PQZ, which you know is a whitefly material. We just wanted to check it out, and I want you to know that we and the industry are sensitive to the observations being made by consumers of their products. And someone said, well, what about Ligas? We think we're seeing something with Ligas. Well, I think this data shows us convincingly that PQZ, while an excellent whitefly material, is not helping out with our Ligas control. Selete is a OMRI certified or organic insecticide. It's a formulation of diatomaceous earth, which is a physical acting material. Didn't show much effect here, so not too good. And Steward, we've demonstrated some limited efficacy in the past. We wanted to follow up on that and see if we could quantify that. And then we have this group of experimentals here, which were only sprayed 1 time. And that was because we wanted to see how long of a residual we would get with these materials. And you can see they suppressed nymphs to quite a large degree. This shaded box shows you the threshold, which our overall threshold is 15 total Ligas, with 4 to 8 nymphs per 100 sweeps. So that band shows you the guideline that we recommend. And in general, we like to see our commercial products perform at or below these levels. And in general, the things that you're used to seeing are working, and with some exceptions here. And there's maybe some reasons for that.
This has a pretty good bowl load, relatively speaking. It does have an open bowl here. It made the early lower bowls before Ligas pressure, and then it made several bowls, both positions here, lost one here, lost one here, lost one here. But the goal, remember, is always to have 50% or better fruit retention by the end of the season, and this has pretty well done that as you move up the plant. So certainly more bowls than what we saw Probably the other thing you'll note is the stature, the height of the plant is quite a bit shorter, more compact than the last plant we looked at. That's more evidence that you've maintained the proper carbohydrate balance with enough carbohydrate sinks, which are your bowls, because you've protected it from ligus losses. Remember, ligus feed principally on squares, causing them to abort, and those are lost fruiting sites. When carbohydrates have nowhere else to go, they'll go into vertical growth. So you really want to see well-fruited, compact plants like this one. And the other thing you want to see at this stage in the season is that it's gone into cutout quite hard. And by that I mean it's bloomed all the way out the top and then not gone any further, or really with little capacity to grow a top crop. And you can identify that by once again looking for the narrowest internode lengths that we have on the plant, and that's basically right in here. And I can tell by the pattern of fruiting that this really was the node right here where my fingers are of cutout. And what's really nice to see is we've made these bowls all the way up to the point of cutout. And then after that, this is unproductive growth. I have some squares. I have 3 squares up top, but really a very narrow region, less than 6 inches up here in this top. This tells you that the plant has done physiologically what it can do under the conditions of this season, for this variety and for our growing conditions. So again, we should avoid investing in these unproductive top growth. Really mature out these bowls that we know we can make and take them to the picker. I'm looking at these at the top of the plants based on our discussion of the role that cutout plays and fruit in relative to the fruit load and ultimate yield potential of a plant. And we can see that once again, this plant cut out right here. This is the final node of cutout, and it very nicely made those last 2 first position bowls. And then the top crop, so-called top crop, has a misshapen flower and a couple squares, and that's it, and it's only a few inches tall. So even without looking at the rest of the plant, I can surmise that this was probably a well-fruited plant because there was no capacity for a top crop in it. That would suggest that it was effective at controlling ligus. And we can look through the canopy a little bit and see that there are open bowls following us up, that all the plants are similarly developed with really that last bowl being made, which is great. That's what we want to see. We don't want to see a big buggy whip at the top of these plants. This is T19. This is the untreated check for this trial. This, in fact, has never been sprayed, except one PGR spray earlier in the season. And the same rules apply here, looking at the crop at this stage. Of course, plant height would be a good indicator. This trial has not resulted in dramatic height differences, but they're here. But more specifically, I think, again, looking at the zone of cutout and how the plant approached it is instructive. So if we scan the upper portion of this plant and look for the narrowest internode, we can see that it was right here. I get one finger in there. Okay, this is the zone of cutout. After this is all top crop. And leading up to it, let's forget the top crop for a minute. We lost both positions on the last fruiting branch. On the previous fruiting branch, we have a scar, and we lost those. So really, this shows you that we had late season ligus pressure in here that prevented efficient fruiting. And the other way we can tell that is we have a good 12 inches of top crop. If this was a well-fruited plant, there wouldn't have been the capacity in this variety to put out this big of a top crop. Now, it is true, the plant is trying to compensate for the earlier losses, and there is the very first bowl in the top crop is going to be made. This is a young bowl here. There's another bowl over here. So that we could see a little bit of compensation, but really most of these are squares and we will not give this enough water or time to mature those out. And even if we did, some of these squares wouldn't be bowls until the new year. So a lot of risk, obviously, in trying to take a crop that late at this location. So effectively, maybe we'll get 1 or 2 bowls compensation here. We're drying out this field right now. I expect to defoliate it within a week or so. So I don't know that those bowls are going to contribute much to yield. That's as much a production decision that any grower needs to make as it is an experimental one here, where we don't wish the untreated check to show compensation, masking our treatment effects. Here's one of those flowers at the top of the plant. You can clearly see that it's misshapen. It's not normal. And in fact, there's little brown spots both on the petals, and there are brown anther sacs there where the pollen is produced. Oh my goodness, and I can see why. Where is he? There is our little bad guy. He has just had a smorgasbord there to feed on. Again, further evidence that they prefer squares and flowers to feeding on bowls. And that's what this one and others have done to ruin this flower. So even if there was enough time, water, crop protection, calendar, heat units, this flower will not pollinate and produce a productive bowl. So in the top of this plant, in this carbine treated plot, we have a flower. It's not a flower that will be productive in that we won't take it to harvest, but it's still informative for us to look at the quality of that flower and see that the petals are in very good shape. There's no damage to the petals. The anthers all look to be pretty much intact, and it is pollinating. I can rub it and get frosting on my finger, which is the pollen. This is indicating that had there been enough time, water, heat units, etc., this flower would have made a bowl that would have been productive. It also shows us that lygus control is much better than the untreated check, where the flowers that are produced right now are all damaged by lygus. Again, we're in the 2020 lygus efficacy trial, and I just cut off the tops of some plants from the plot behind me. This is an experimental chemistry that we're looking at, which has actually performed very well in the control of lygus, and that is backed up by our harvest data. Again, short season cotton that was planted the very end of May, and last irrigations in mid-August, defoliated in September, and harvested in early October. So a very quick season, again, to accentuate the impact of lygus on the primary fruiting cycle. And what you'll notice about this, beyond the fact that it's very well fruited at the top, is that there really isn't a zone of cutout till you get to the very top. In other words, there is no top crop on this. That tells you that the fruit retention was very good in the primary fruiting cycle, and there was no need for compensation in this plant because it was already physiologically maxed out. So again, a very good result. That's what you want to see. And in fact, this is equivalent to about 3.5 bales per acre in this relatively short season format, where lygus control was excellent, outstanding. And in fact, this was only one spray against lygus. In contrast, in our untreated check, I've got the upper 10 to the top bowl, but really the upper 13 nodes on this untreated check plant, one that was not sprayed for lygus. And in fact, very little production, but most of those nodes are in the secondary fruiting cycle. All these nodes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of those 13 nodes are in the secondary fruiting cycle. Our goal again was to make sure that that didn't become productive, because if it did, that would allow the untreated check to compensate after lygus have left the field and dilute our efforts in screening lygus chemistry.
All right, so with a drum roll, we can now look at the yield results. And you can see that I was explaining some rather detailed things about the plants in the field, and that was in part because we weren't seeing large differences in the field. It was much subtler, and that shows up in this yield data as well. Certainly, we had good yields overall, maxing out close to 3.5 bales. But what was really probably the biggest thing is our untreated check made it 2.6 bales. So that was without any Ligas sprays all season long. We still made 2.6 bales. Probably was not too surprising that we didn't see larger differences, given how well fruited all of the cotton looked in general. Still, Transform performed well. A few of these others performed well. But really, the big story here is all these white entries, the experimental chemistries that we examined with only one spray. They were the only ones that were significantly higher than the check. So definitely a good outcome there, and maybe we'll see a new product in the future. To give you an idea of what you're looking at and evaluating, here it is after harvest. We've actually harvested out 4 rows adjacent here. You can hardly tell that over here. So I've put a box around 2 adjacent plots that come from the highest and the lowest yielding in this trial. And the highest was from that experimental, as you can see on the left, where excellent Ligas control, and where we had no Ligas control, still had pretty good boll load, all things considering. Now I could play a game and make you all put in the chat box how much you think each made, but I'll just tell you that was 3.5 bales and that was 2.5 bales. So the difference between the left and the right is a bale of cotton. Certainly very significant, but a good amount of variation still in this trial. So let's move on to whiteflies. We also screen products for whitefly control, and here in this group of chemistries, you see some of your familiar actors here, the Asail at 3.5 and 2.3 ounces, PQZ, and Sivanto HL, which is a new formulation of Sivanto that's twice as concentrated as the Sivanto Prime that you're using now. So it was sprayed at 5 and 7 ounces. And then we have Safina at the maximum rate. Now these were sprayed twice on threshold, and there were plenty of whiteflies in this trial, so those sprays were in fact needed. We have a second group of materials, including the Selete, which is that diatomaceous earth again. We also are looking at Midius, which is obviously a mite insecticide or a caricide that has some whitefly efficacy. But again, all these had to be sprayed 4 or 5 times. That reflects that they're not quite as efficacious as our standard materials. In addition, we did a rescue spray that happened after these counts were taken on 4 of those entries that really needed that very late season spray. You know, the one that you really kind of have to second guess yourself about. You're so close to defoliation, you hate to put another spray out there, but these plots really needed that additional help. Now we have something different here, and that is we have one that I'm calling the predator threshold entry that you see there on the bottom in green. It only got sprayed 1 time. Now what I didn't explain is our untreated check was in fact untreated for whiteflies, but we did disrupt. We went in and we sprayed with orthene twice. So we used acephate twice across this entire trial. Now that was to do 2 things. One, we had a lot of predators in this trial and they were slowing me down and getting my whiteflies going. So we use acephate in order to kill the predators to release whiteflies from that natural control. But we also have to control Ligas. So each time that we controlled Ligas, which was twice in this trial, we used acephate. The only exception was this green bar entry, where instead we use carbine, a selective insecticide for Ligas. In other words, selective in that it kills the target pest, but doesn't harm the natural enemies. So think of this as being your natural enemy entry. And as a result of working with chemistry and the natural enemies, we only had to spray 1 time. We'll be saying more about that in a moment. I do want to say that, you know, managing whiteflies, even if you've been doing it for years, is no easy business. And part of that is because we're trying to prevent quality loss. It's not something measurable in the field, but when we see densities like this, three large nymphs per disc or higher, that's when we start to see quality losses. That's when we see the chance for stickiness in the crop. If we go even higher, you can actually get yield losses. And in fact, in the Select and the untreated check, we would expect yield losses because we had sustained densities there that were very, very high. These were some very massive densities. Now, here's the adult numbers for the same trial, same setup, 3 to 5 adults per leaf, or this is 40% infested at this level here. And you can see that in general, the patterns are the same. Both rates of assail worked very well. No difference between them. PQZ was a leader in the trial. The high rate of Sivanto did look significantly better than the low rate. Safina, a good material, not as strong as these others, and that's reflected in this rating here as well. And then you can see where Mitius didn't do as much as we'd like it to do, but does show some suppression of whiteflies. And our predator threshold was certainly in line with some of our standards. So what does that leave us? Just a reminder, we have a chemical use guide that we put out. There'll be links made available to you to download that. But we have several options, very good options. First of all, our fully selective materials are the ones that control the whiteflies without harming natural enemies. That includes PQZ and Sivanto, certainly at the high rate. Here, our predator threshold did very well. We were working with our natural enemies. And then we have assail, which is our partially effective, partially selective materials that are very effective. And I want to note that that 2.3 ounce rate really does still perform if given a chance. All right, I say just for fun. Well, what am I doing there? I'm spraying some canola oil on a window pane, if you can believe that. So this is a little demonstration because we can't be in the field today. Naomi and I had to come up with a way to convince you that we really had some whiteflies out there. I liked Pedro's video earlier, but I think you'll like some of these videos even better. What I did is I dressed up that window pane with canola oil, and then I walked through the plot just like this, with that window pane in front of me. It's a 40-foot walk that I've done. And at the end of it, I get to the end of the plot and we get to see the results. But so you can see more of what's going on in the canopy. Naomi and I walk backwards, and I think you can, I think most people would agree that there's a fair number of whiteflies in this trial. This is the untreated check. It was good that we're wearing masks these days because you'd be coughing up pretty good in this plot. The result after I come out of the untreated check looks like this. Now, one of your quiz questions in order to get your credits today is to count every one of those whiteflies. All right, everybody awake? A lot of whiteflies there, too many. Whenever I ask how many there are, you're just supposed to say too many, and there are too many. Here is the untreated check on that day. Again, in comparison to PQZ, actually before the second spray got put on, just before. And you can see definitely a lot fewer whiteflies than the PQZ, and it was leading the trial for most of the trial. But then this gives you also the predator threshold. Remember, this is the one where we didn't kill out the natural enemies. Now, where does it belong? Is it closer to the untreated check? Is it closer to PQZ? Well, in fact, our counts show it to be about 6 per leaf here in PQZ and about 30 per leaf, which is astronomically high in the untreated check. And the predator threshold, when it finally broke, was at 10 per leaf, and we did in fact go ahead and spray, and I elected to use Sivanto Prime at 14 ounces in that treatment. Here are some of the others if you just want to see. Again, I wouldn't recommend this as an experimental tool, but as a demonstration for you to generally see the number of whiteflies. This shows you the PQZ again, the untreated check. Here's the Select, which was also around 30 adults per leaf. The assail, both rates looked good, similar to PQZ. And then the Sivanto at the high rate looked good. I don't know if you can tell, but the Safina there is loading up with more whiteflies than we were comfortable with. And certainly we did have to put on that extra spray.
Demonstrate magic here. That leaf is not coming off of me because it's bound to me by the sugars deposited by these whiteflies, especially the large ones. Sootiness will follow as soon as Humidity's increased, but there's sootiness on the undersides of this leaf. And there are probably tens of thousands of whiteflies on that one cotton leaf.
So that's all well and good, but the real question is, can we measure this in the field for decision-making purposes? Can we measure stickiness or sugars in some way? And the answer is just flat out no, we can't. And that's why we have to measure whiteflies instead. Now, what we've done in recent years and been teaching for the past year or two is that in addition to measuring whiteflies, which we do on a percent infestation scale, we now can measure predators, the densities of 6 different key predators. Minute pirate bugs is shown here, and there's different decision zones, and we can track them through time. And on our first sample date, we could see that we had lots of aureus or minute pirate bugs, but very few whiteflies. That's an easy decision. We would never spray under those conditions. But we can come out at our next sampling bout and see that the whiteflies have increased, still in the don't spray region. And then we crossed over, right? Our minute pirate bugs are a little lower density, and our whiteflies are a higher density. The recommendation here would be to spray if we didn't have any other information. But in fact, we do. We have information from the other 5 predators that we're monitoring. I'm just showing you the one. And in this case, I elected not to spray because of what I knew what was happening with those other predators. And I was rewarded for that decision because there's this battle that's going on between whiteflies and the predators. And in fact, the whiteflies came back down and the aureus went back up, or the minute pirate bugs. And finally, we ended up, not finally, but on our next date, we ended up right there at that pucker point between, deferring a spray and the always spray zone. Now, I elected to defer in part because I had a lot more information available to me. Now, don't get scared here, but there's all that information. All those are those 3-dimensional tracings of what's happening with your pirate bugs, your crab spiders, your Drapetus flies, your lacewings, your big-eyed bugs, and your Colops beetles. Those are the key predators that we can monitor. Surely no one would go to all this to chart it out to make the decision, but it just underscores how complex it can be. It shouldn't scare you though, because you don't have to look at all that at once. And what I learned as a little boy, working with my father many times, is you have to use the right size. You have to right size the tool for your situation, and that means I can't use a 1/2 inch on a 1/4 inch nut here. I've got to be using the right tool. And even though there are 8 thresholds available to you, you don't have to use them all. Only one of them needs to be working. But fundamentally, you have your whitefly densities and the thresholds that go with them. You need to measure those. But now you have 8 predator thresholds that you can also monitor. You're going to use the one that works for this field this time when you're in that field, because Drapetus flies may not be there, but Colops beetles are. Track those Colops beetles, see if they're showing you biological control, see if you can defer a spray. If you can, that's the only one you need to pay attention to. And then the next time you can use a different one. It all depends on what's in your field.
This cotton plot was never sprayed for whiteflies, and it is unsprayed for Lygus shoe. Other plots were also never sprayed for whiteflies, but were treated with carbene for Lygus control, and there appears similar to this plot. No broad-spectrum sprays were made in this plot. Natural enemies are left, therefore, to control whiteflies. These cotton leaves are healthy, not covered in honeydew or sooty mold. This plot is extremely clean, which is representative of the modest whitefly levels present in central Arizona at the time of the filming. Whitefly numbers are well below threshold, and the beneficials found in the cotton system are able to maintain biological control of the whiteflies. This allows us to defer a spray and potentially eliminate a future spray as long as biological control continues to function. In this plot, you can clearly see the increased number of whiteflies adults. This cotton has been treated multiple times with the broad-spectrum acephate. As you are aware, broad spectrums are non-selective and will kill your beneficials. Our goal was to eliminate as many of the predators as possible. This shows the result, where a high number of whiteflies excrete honeydew that coats the leaves. A full rate of Sivanto was applied here. Sivanto is working, which is apparent by the dead adults sticking to the honeydew-covered leaves. Even with a spray meant to selectively target the whiteflies, without the control provided by natural enemies, it is very difficult to successfully manage this pest with any insecticide. It is therefore important not to become overly reliant on organophosphates, pyrethroids, or other broad-spectrum insecticides. Using predator thresholds instead of just the traditional pest-centric thresholds, you would have known this plot was in trouble and would have applied a selective insecticide even sooner. A side-by-side comparison of the two treatments shows a drastic difference in whitefly densities. These plots are only 10 feet apart, but tell completely different stories. Notice the number of adults present in the cotton on the right compared to that on the left of the screen. Copious honeydew in the cotton on the right indicates large number of whitefly nymphs. Where a disruption with a broad spectrum was made, a whitefly spray was required 2 weeks prior to filming. Even with this whitefly spray, the whiteflies in the broad spectrum plot are well above threshold and have since had an additional application. When the beneficials are allowed to thrive and do their job of eating whiteflies and other pests, the whiteflies can oftentimes be managed with very little insecticide use. These two plots show the importance of having natural enemies in our fields. Knowing when to time a spray is key to use chemical controls properly and economically. In order to make the best decision, we look at the percent infestation of whiteflies. Looking at adults only, you have a threshold of 40 to 57%, where you need to possibly consider a spray. Above the 60% infestation with adults, a spray is required, regardless of natural enemies in your field. Let's look at what was going on in the plots treated with a broad spectrum and those that were not disrupted at all. At the beginning of the season, whitefly adult levels were low in both of our plot treatments, but we used acephate to chemically exclude predators from the broad spectrums all season long. Acephate alone will not kill whiteflies, but it will kill most of the natural enemies. When the natural enemies die, you lose ground in the natural control of the whitefly population. With fewer natural enemies feeding on whiteflies, the more whiteflies you have. Whereas if you have enough natural enemies in your field, the fewer whiteflies you'll have, and if you do have to spray, your selective insecticides will work even better. Especially if successive applications of a broad spectrum are made, the beneficials will never recover, and you ended up in a situation where whiteflies are well above threshold much sooner in the season. What's worse? What it will make even more difficult for your chemical controls to work against the unconstrained whitefly population.
Okay, hopefully you know that wasn't me speaking. That was Isadora doing the narration on that last video. I'm going to finish up by just showing you the trajectory of adult whiteflies in our screening trial. This shows you the untreated check going into that yield loss area, quality loss before that, but yield loss thereafter, and the two sprays that were made on PQZ, which was disrupted with acephate, but nonetheless performed extremely well. And what I want to show you now is that predator threshold treatment that we looked at before. The distinction here being we didn't make that first spray. We instead let it ride because we hadn't used the acephate. The natural enemies were still working, and therefore keeping the whiteflies sub-economic. We did ultimately have to spray, but we only had to spray one time, and we were able to defer that spray by 5 weeks. So the savings there are quite obvious, and the message remains the same. We want to conserve those natural enemies to help us out in whitefly control. I've gone a little bit over, and I apologize for that and the technical difficulties, but I do want to thank the Arizona Cotton Growers Association for supporting our research along with Cotton Incorporated. We absolutely could not do this work without their input and funding. Also from the Extension Implementation Program, a grant that we have with USDA NIFA. The various agro-industries that also support us. And I also want to thank my close collaborators, Dr. Steve Naranjo and Dr. Tim Vandervoot, who have helped develop all the information that we've presented, and the large IPM staff that helped collect all these data. If Naomi has a chance, she'll put these links in the box if you want to get our IPM shorts, our little short bulletins on the cotton insecticide use guide or how to use those predators more effectively. These 4 publications will get you on track. And with that, I'll conclude, and if there's time, answer any questions, Simon.
Thank you, Peter. And it's time now for the questions. It's really interesting presentation. Thank you. Any questions for Peter? It's your time now before you will be asked later in the at the end of the meeting. So if there is any question, feel free either to type them in the chat box or just unmute yourself and speak out.
Well, not hearing none. I'm going to add one more slide. I feel compelled to do this. I know many of you probably don't know Bob Nichols. Bob Nichols was a research manager at Cotton Incorporated probably for the last 20 some odd years, worked in the industry for many, many years. He passed away this past month after retiring in August and after a late in life diagnosis with ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. But I want to just pay homage to him and say that much of the whitefly research that was done here, whether it was in my lab or with the ACRPC or with Tim Dennehy or some of the early workers here in Arizona, Bob Nichols was instrumental to making sure that Arizona had the support they needed in order to overcome the whitefly problems we were experiencing. So just want to say rest in peace, Bob. We miss you.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing that. He's really missed. Bob was really a good scientist and a good power behind all the cotton research in IPM in the whole country. Thank you, Peter. Okay, now we shared some link here for the cotton guide. If you guys want to make sure that you have this link in your favorite and make sure that you are having them in the chat box, and I'm pretty sure we